Hello, everybody. This is Todd Nilsson, one of the volunteer organizers for the Catalyzing the Future event, which is a free global online event talking about how can we build better futures for ourselves, for our businesses, for the world that we live in. And today, as part of the lead up to that event on September the 30th, we have a couple of guests with us from a business called Beautiful Business. And it's Richard Merrick and Alan Moore, along with Sai Alhir, my compatriot and the founder of Catalyzing the Future. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring them into the channel, and we will talk a little bit about how to build better, more beautiful businesses. Alan, Richard, Sai, welcome to you all.
Thank you very much.
Hey. Thanks, Todd.
Sai, I think your audio's off.
My apologies. My apologies. I was saying thank you so much, and it's a privilege to be here with Alan and Richard, and always with Todd. So definitely welcome all of you. To dive right in, I would love Alan and Richard briefly introduce yourselves, and then we can get into the conversation around beautiful business.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and it's great to be here. Sai and Todd, and great to be with my compatriot Richard here today. I'm the author of a book called No Straight Lines, Making Sense of Our Non-Linear World. New Design, Why Beauty is Key to Everything. And there's a new book coming out, which is called Do Build, How to Make and Lead a Business the World Needs. My interest, my motivation, the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is thinking about how can we bring more beauty into this world, and how can we make businesses more beautiful.
Very eloquently said,
Thanks.
my friend. Richard, please.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, my name is Richard Merrick, has been said a couple of times. I act principally as a catalyst. My backgrounds, I've run business. I was in the military. I've run businesses for the last 20 years. I've been coaching, and really since the beginning of the global pandemic, I've been focusing on how do we take advantage of what's going on? How do we use this disruption to not just try and resile from it, but to actually use it, to leverage it. And that's where really I came across my collaboration with Alan began. So I love the idea of beautiful business because I must have written, I don't know, over the time, probably a couple of hundred business plans. I can't remember having beautiful in any of them. And I love that juxtaposition, which is how could your business be more beautiful? And that's what really attracted me. I've known Alan's work really since he first published No Straight Lines. I've reached out to him, and we've been talking since then. And I think in the current times, this very sort of provocation of beautiful in business is really powerful. And so, from my point of view, I'd really like to say here, Alan, tonight, talk about what he means by beautiful business, how that started. I will no doubt interrupt along the way as I do, but I'm a huge enthusiast for Alan and his work and its timing and for what we might do with it right now. So I'm going to shut up for a bit, Alan, which I know you'll find is a surprise, but there we go.
So do definitely share, Alan. Please help us better understand what is beautiful business all about.
Well, the word beauty, I think, is a very compacted word. It's got lots of different elements to it, which we all understand. I think we intuit rather than it's a thought in a sense. So for me, beauty is foundational to all life. The laws of the universe are described to be beautiful. Einstein's theory of relativity, Paul Dirac's theory about how atomic particles will dance with each other across vast distances in space. All of those are described to be beautiful. And the idea that nature, in a sense, is designed to regenerate the world that we live in. And that, to me, it seems is something that we should now be looking at as individuals, as businesses, a whole variety of different scales in terms of what does that mean for us. I think it also has an ethical dimension, which is how do you bring the good into the world? Business once upon a time was something that was in service to the greater good, to be in service to others. And to me, that is also a fundamental part of what I mean to be about beauty. So in a sense, there's a weave that goes on. There's so much described about when we read about business, it gets so kind of siloed. Well, it's not even siloed, it's sliced and diced into these tiny little kind of compartments. And we as human beings have kind of created this, but actually it doesn't really give us what we need to live bountifully in this world is the way that I see it. And I think also beauty is about a language which is about wonder, it's about joy, it's about compassion, empathy, reciprocity, the honoring of each other and the world that we live in. And I know all of that for maybe people listening into this conversation would sound a little bit utopian. But I know from the hard experience that I've had that those are the hardest things that you can bring into the world. It requires so much more work, so much more effort. But if you're able to bring that beauty then into the world, you're able to build a very different type of foundational basis to what you can create for us today and what you can create for people for tomorrow. So I suppose the other element to that is ancestry and legacy. Am I being a good ancestor? Am I creating legacy? And not everybody has kind of subscribed to that idea or concept, I think, which is in part why we're at the place that we're at. And lastly, I suppose there's a soulful part to this, which is we are all soulful beings, and our soulfulness, our spiritualness needs to be fed. And if it's not fed, then we suffer as a consequence of that. So in my journey, I suppose I've felt that there is this dichotomy between business as the answer, in that I think we've always been trading as a species, as sapiens, but we need to think very carefully about what it is we trade and what we give back to the world. And that to me is a kind of very broad brushstroke of what I think beauty can give to the world, and that we actually need to reclaim it. And I think it's our homecoming. We need to come home to beauty as a language that we're all very happy to use and be comfortable with.
Very elegantly said, my friend. And I think you really touched upon something very crucial, especially in the time that we find ourselves. What do you say and how do you engage those that look at this conversation and truly say, hey, this is utopian, that isn't realistic, people are suffering? What's the response that you have relative to that, Alan?
Well, the response to that is in Do Design Why Beauty is Key to Everything, the the last book I wrote, at the very end of the book, I have this piece called "Living off the Coast of Utopia," because in my experience of being a businessman, as an innovator, as a maker, as a whatever, I always felt the act was a creative act, which you would reach for the thing that was the best thing that you could reach for, because why would you not reach for the best thing? I mean, I don't understand why you would pull back from that. But what I understood is that's a very creative mindset to have. It's almost an artistic mindset to have. So when I wrote this piece, what I said is that it's only the optimistic or the hopeful that finds an uncharted passage that no one else has seen. It's only someone that has opened the heavens to a new spirit, or it's only someone that has sort of seen a star system in an entirely different way. So, micro, macro, you only do those things with great hope and with great optimism. And what I also say is that we never get to utopia. We never get to that place. But unless we embark on our journey of innovation or making or change or whatever it is that we wish to bring to the world, through social justice or all of the things that we maybe could describe around those things, without that great optimism and hope, then we have no hope. We don't quite get to where we need to get to, but we get to something much closer if we have the energy and the desire to want to bring something better into the world, right? So that's the way that I see it. And I see that very much as an artistic endeavor. And the one that you hold not in your head, not that thought isn't important, but you have to hold it you have to hold this idea or this belief somewhere much deeper inside of you, to want to find that possibility or that opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think great change, great innovation, and great breakthrough comes from. Yeah.
So I think as well, if I can just jumping in for a minute there, and I think it's much more accessible than we think. Going back to when lockdown started, for the last 5 years, up until the beginning of this year, I've been extending my own learning, but by becoming much more familiar with the spiritual side. So I have far too many years being on the scientific side of management. And so I started to try to understand what my wife calls my weird hippie friends brought to this. And the timing's been quite interesting, because when lockdown started, I got together two groups, one from the measurers, the scientists, and the others from the people I term the mystics, and brought them together around what was going on as a result of COVID. So we had a common ground, if you like, of something that nobody really understood at that point. Because generally speaking, my previous experience was the people from the scientific disciplines thought the people from the mystic side of it spent their years smoking cannabis, and the people on the mystic side of it had a view that the people in business were just after the money and trying to find ways to extract the world's wealth. Elements of truth, I guess, in both of those, but by far from the total truth. And the thing that really surprised was that, and in fact, Alan came in on one of the early conversations. It's not true. You find something like COVID with its existential nature, and the speed with which the two sides came together was actually quite staggering. And in fact, those groups are still going. I started with back in March when I thought they'd last a few weeks, and they are still going strong. And in fact, not only are they going strong, they're sort of getting stronger. They have become a weekly feature of people's lives. That people go along, people will go to great lengths to make sure they don't miss. Because that conversation in the middle of, the beautiful and the banal, exploring that area, that juxtaposition of business and beautiful, is a hugely creative place to be. And that's why I think Alan's work is so critical to what we're looking at right now.
Well said on both of your parts. So if I look at this as a business owner, as a entrepreneur struggling, if you will, with the reality at hand, and I say, Alan, Richard, what are the top 3 things I can do to embrace and really go ahead and begin to embody a more beautiful business?
So I think that the first thing I would say is, and of course, so I would honor all those that are in a very difficult place at the moment and struggling, because there's a lot of that out there. The first thing I say is perhaps harness your imagination, what is possible in this world. So maybe the first thing is framing. The framing is we're all done, and it's it's all going very wrong, and we're all doomed. Or we could say this gives me an extraordinary opportunity to reinvent myself and reinvent the world that I live in. There are no guarantees in this life for anyone. And quite often we think that because someone has money or whatever, that they're in a good place and it's okay. And it may actually be that that's not the case at all. So I think that ability to kind of be able to step back, accept, and reframe. What is it I can bring to this world that could matter? And it's one of the things I write about, the mattering. So lots of people talk about purpose, but there are lots of people out there with purpose, whose purpose I think is probably not particularly constructive or helpful to bringing the good into the world. For me, the mattering is the way I would describe it is, does it matter to the world? Does it matter to me? Does it matter to my team? Does it matter to what we can bring? In big and small ways, it doesn't really matter. But I think that is quite crucial in terms of the principle of what you're doing. As I said earlier, that idea of can I create legacy and can I be a good ancestor? What can I do that perhaps will build a foundation for others to follow on from? And how can I bring something good into the world? How can I bring that into my community? It could be within a family context. It could be in a local community context. It could be in a city context. It could be in a regional context, or it could be in a global context. But the idea of doing something beautiful is kind of very important. So really thinking about, I asked that part of why I chose the title for the book I did, which is, how to build and lead a business the world needs, is what does the world need? And the question then you ask for yourself is, what can I give to the world that needs it? Because I think that then you find a very different place and role and purpose, or meaning and mattering, as a consequence of asking that question of yourself and what you can give. And that could be manifest in a whole variety of different ways. It's not, I wouldn't be anyone that would say, you all have to be billionaires. I think we've got to the point where we realize that real value in this world is fundamental on something fundamentally different than the money we make. Money for business is important because it's oxygen. We can't do stuff without money. money for a business in terms of profit, I would say, is like fertilizer. You know, you can feed back into making better things, but the pursuit of the business or what it is you want to do because it makes money for money's sake is not the reason why we live on this planet. And I think that is a value shift that is going on at the moment, which is really kind of fundamental. So that's where I would start in terms of what I would say to people.
I think there's another side as well. One of the things that having been across both arches, the people I have been speaking with, I'm currently talking to, there is actually quite a brutal conversation to be had. Because there's one half of the conversation that says, what have you got to do to make payroll? What have you got to do to survive long enough to do what you really want to do? And there are two parallel conversations that need to, quite often, certainly at the beginning, need to be kept apart. Because most of the people in business I know fall foul of that Buddhist edict that, you know, be careful what you own because it's likely to own up to you.
Mm-hmm.
And they find themselves in businesses that they have started and have become successful, but they're now hostage to. You know, all of the things, whether it's legislation or whether it's payroll or whether it's just family expectation, there's a whole load of things that actually keep them going. And they need to take some, and quite often they may be fairly brutal decisions, but they've got, you know, whether it's cutting jobs, they've got to do something quite often at the moment to actually keep the mechanics of the business, the cash flow going. But that doesn't mean they can't think about beautiful. So the way that I found in particular is you need to create a separate space. And in the separate space, they do the thing and they effectively turn all their business phones off, they turn their cell phone off. And they talk about, what are you really about and where do you really want to go? And how can we get to there from where you are now? And those are often really quite provocative conversations because they imply there's a high energy, because on the one hand, people get really excited about what they could do and really, really scared about the changes that they may have to entertain in order to get there. And I think that's the space we're in. There is no easy answer to that. But I think it's the old F. Scott Fitzgerald thing about holding two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and retaining the ability to function. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where it sits at the moment. And there's people I have enormous respect for who are dealing with some really difficult decisions as to how they're going to do this, but they are determined to do it. And that's what gives me hope for it, because I think in terms of everything that's going on at the moment, I agree totally with Alan that you could do the doom and gloom framing. And you can't do this sort of Pollyanna, it'll all be wonderful because it'll sort itself out framing at the same time. But in the middle there, bit of a hero's journey sort of thing, really, a bit of a road of trials. There is a way through this to something that will benefit not just the individuals, but the society they're part of. And I think we're discovering that. You know, COVID's visceral. It's existential. You know, people die. We see the scorecards most days. It gives us a different view on what's going on. And it's within that context, going back to these groups, that, again, I think Alan's work has, it's quite slow. It's an interesting, it's a bit like Tinder, you know, and there are books that you can get people to read, things that you can get them to watch. But no, when I have in one of the groups, I have a tax account talking to journey of the soul, which is something I never, to be honest, thought I'd see. But there are people there who, once there's a little part of them that gets touched by the nature of the conversation, the nature of beauty, the nature of legacy, the idea of we're here for the 7 generations beyond. And it only needs the tiniest little bit of kindling mm-hmm. to actually turn them from raging skeptics to raging proponents.
Mm-hmm.
Nicely extended. And that's what I found out, as we're seeing now, and both the way that Alan talks and what he writes. And if you want to give yourself a really hard time, beautifully hard time, go for a walk with them.
Yeah.
Because that's where it comes from.
Yeah. And I know I'm dominating the conversation here. I've got one more question, Todd. Please chime in likewise. Most definitely. If you look at some of the words that we've used historically and that remain, I'll say, in the vernacular of the social consciousness, one word that comes to mind is happy. We've talked about happiness historically. I see the word fun. I see the word beautiful. Alan, Richard, how do you guide us in distinguishing between some of these words that may seem similar at times, but are uniquely distinct?
Well, I think actually the word that I would use is joyful. Joyful is a very different word to happiness. I think joyful, when you are joyful, you are deeply connected to an experience which is embedded in you. It's we can be happy, but happiness, I think, feels more like a kite to me. It's a kite.
Okay. I think you're frozen there for Alan. So until you come back for a moment, I'll just fill in a gap, because I agree entirely with the joyful side of it.
Yeah.
I also think there's an aspect in there. The word I would add to it is grounded, which is, no matter which way we want to approach it, we all have a unique gift at birth. Most of us grow up and trained out of it. We're trained to go to work quite often in somebody else's clothes. And the grounded bit is that sense of calm, which is almost no matter what is going on, we can deal with it as who we really are. And it's that sense of confidence and solidity, not just in ourselves, but in those around us. We're authentic to ourselves. We're secure in the relationships that we have around us. And that gives us the energy and the confidence to go forward. And so, Alan, you froze for a moment there, so I just waved my arms around for a bit while you were coming back online.
I got bumped off the internet. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm back now.
I was just adding the word grounded to your joy.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's those two things are definitely connected for me. How do you bring joy into life? Because I think that joyful, if you ask someone to remember a memory, if you ask them if they were happy or if you ask them if they were joyful, I think joyful would take them into something much more profound and more rooted rather than happy. I suspect. So that's my intuition. And so when I talk about cultures, in terms of any kind of organizational culture, I don't talk about happy. I talk about joyful. How do you make a joyful culture? I want to walk into that space. So pre-COVID, but I want to walk into that space joyful, or the people that I'm going to meet, I'm going to feel joyful about, or the experience is going to be joyful. And that to me is a form of rooting and rootedness, which is, I think, very different to the happy word, in a sense, which is more fleeting.
Yeah. You're on mute, Todd.
Sorry about that. I was having some internet problems there myself. Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by the intentionality of the language that you're choosing, sort of, happy versus joyful and grand, and it makes me, think in terms of some of what you were saying earlier. It's about how you choose the frame, how you choose to start thinking about, where we are in the world and how we can matter. and a lot of that has to do with the language we choose to describe ourselves and our situation.
It's really, I think it's to me, that's fundamental. I think a lot about language, and it is absolutely fundamental to us as human beings. The language we choose to use, or the language we choose not to use, is the framing on which we then see the world. So I can't remember the lady's name, but her words were "words make worlds," and
Judith Glaser, I think.
And then this idea that language is generative, and through that language, then we can create a form of storytelling, because we are story. And I know it's cliched, and sometimes it feels like a really worn carpet, but actually, your children will all listen to the most compelling story you've ever got to tell, or anybody else. They can, those words can weave a magic and a belief. So we don't operate as human beings based on fact. We base it on belief, right? So for me, we have to be the best storytellers in the world. We have to tell the best stories. I think in terms of what I would like to do, I think we have to do that with great responsibility, in the we are responsible and accountable for what it is we are telling and what we are saying. But equally, we have to create that framework, that storytelling of which fills us with optimism. Which is why someone once asked me, so what can the language of beauty give the sustainability movement? And I said, well, I'm a musician and I play the guitar, and I can play what's called a sustaining note. Think of Carlos Santana, playing his very long, guitar solos. But I said, there's a point it has to stop. And what that makes me feel like is I'm hanging on by my fingernails. And I said, I want to tell you a story where you're going to fill your life with joy, and it's going to be enriching. And so sustainability for me is limiting, whereas beauty is actually something actually much more fundamental about it, and enriching, and is infinite. Actually, it has an infinite capacity to bring things into the world. It requires us to dig so deep into ourselves to bring that into the world. There's no doubt about that in my book. But to Todd's point again, that this language, this storytelling is so key to where we get to, from where we are to where we need to be. And we need to describe a place which is better for everybody, and everybody wants to go there, or feels attracted to, rather than feeling that you're being spoken to from a position of with a language that you don't understand, with a dialect that is nonsensical to you. And I use that in a way that's like, if people talk about SDGs or ESGs or the acronyms of all the things around the sustainability movement, which I'm fully signed up to, but for a lot of people, they don't have access to. They just don't have access to that. Whereas great storytellers have an ability to describe that journey or that place or space or both in a way where you say, I really want some of that and I believe in it. And I think that's, if we look at where the whole world is at the moment, we have storytellers which are telling stories which are for a different reason than bringing the good into the world. There are stories around power and there are stories around fear. And I know that, and that we as human beings respond much more profoundly around stories around fear than we do around stories around hope. So you as a storyteller, if you're going to tell a story of hope, you have to be a supreme storyteller in terms of offering up that opportunity of something that could be so much better. But the reality is that is what everybody wants. That's what everybody desperately cries for, you know, when they're lying in their beds at night or waking up in the morning, you know, drinking their tea or their coffee or whatever it is they're doing and going, where do I find the story that tells me this is all going to be okay, right? And there have been people in this period and over the last 4 years and some that have been very good about telling stories about fear and very good at creating division and telling stories about the other. And we need to tell a story about actually that is not the case. We need to tell a story about we are actually one tribe, we are diverse, and in many ways we are so much better through our diversity, but we have to respect that. And through our understanding then and compassion of realizing that we are that one tribe, we have the capacity to do extraordinary things in this world. Anger, hate, the other, whatever else one would choose to put on that list is a toxic list which is limited in the capacity of what it can make, because the reality is it can't make anything. You know, it's a bad recipe to take into the kitchen and try and make a meal from that. Whereas actually, I think we can create a story which is a recipe. It's not something I've ever thought about before, which is inclusive and says we can all be part of this taking of this meal, this thing, this culture, I don't know, whatever it is we want to make. And the reality is that that's already happening. To me, that's already happening. It's just that the mainstream media has no desire to represent that story because it doesn't sell newspapers, right? It doesn't make money. But the reality is that is what everybody wants. Yeah. And they want beauty and they want a more beautiful life, whichever way that is meaningful for them. It's a universal language, and we all yearn for it. I yearn for it. If someone came to me and knocked on my door and said, Alan, you know, I can offer you up something that would be a more beautiful way of being in the world, on the basis that I didn't think he was a, you know, carpet salesman. If I believed in his authenticity and his honesty and his integrity, I would be really engaged with what he or she had to say. And there are actually, I know, so many people out there in the world which are telling that story in so many different ways, so profoundly, so wisely, so poetically, and we just have to open our hearts to that, I think, and trust in it and say, yes, this is what I want, because we really know that's what we really want. I'll stop there. I think that's probably quite enough.
It's very eloquently said all around.
Yeah, beautiful.
Exactly. I want to definitely respect your both Richard, your time, and Alan, your time, and likewise Todd, of course. Any sort of, you know, parting thoughts that you'd like to, you know, people really to echo and embrace as we move forward? If you can top that statement that you just made, Alan, I'll put it that way, because it was quite brilliant.
Well, at the end of the book, in the last book, I talk about the philosophy of ing. So we, as you know, I'm dyslexic, so I do struggle, but I know the difference between nouns and verbs, right? So a noun describes a thing. and it objectifies it. Whereas a verb is an ing. It's a doing thing, and it has animacy. It's animated. And I talk about beauty being an ing. You do beauty. So whether you're weaving, baking, stitching, coding, building, entrepreneuring, it's a bit of an abuse of a word, but I'll use it, founding, engineering, whatever, you can bring beauty into everything that you do. And so for me, beauty is a verb. And actually, I ran a workshop about 4 years ago with a group of companies, and at the end of the day, I asked them to, give me feedback and what was the one thing you took away from this day. And this one guy wrote on this card, "Beauty is a verb. I do." And I thought, that's fantastic. Yeah. And I really thought, if that's the possibility, then it's great, because we take it from a noun and we turn it into a verb. I do beauty, so whatever it is that we're doing, then in big and small ways, whoever we are as human beings on this planet, we have the capacity to bring that ing into the work of what we do. And that is what I would really love everyone to embrace, and to go out into the world and bring a little bit more ing to the beauty that they do. Yeah.
Fantastic. Any thoughts from you, Richard, at all? And imparting, my friend.
Just a very quick one. I think it was Picasso who said that every child is born an artist. The challenge is to retain the artist in them as they grow older. Most of us have been, my generation, without doubt the oldest here, we've actually been trained into a world of quantification and rewarded in a world of quantification. But actually, it's the artist that resonates. And it's the artist in us that beauty resonates with. So I think in all of this, no matter what the situation is, I think it goes back to framing. We can do this. We just sort of have to start.
Very well said. Very well said. And definitively, I know the conversation will continue as we get into the 30th. So with that, by all means, Todd, please.
No, thank you guys. Really wonderful for you to join us. And I'm just going to go ahead and end the broadcast here. But thank you so much for coming in for another installment of Catalyzing Conversations. Once again, if you have not signed up already, please go to catalyzingthefuture.com, where you can sign up for this free global conference on the 30th of September, running from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern. And there will be these conversations and many more with inspiration and ideas about building your beautiful and joyous business. I hope that you will join us then. Have a great day.